Welcome to the SIWIKE podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SIWIKE podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. For today's episode, I thought I'd get into a bit of a guide for HR, for human resources. And even though I wasn't actually a real kind of HR trained professional, I've had a lot of HR functions in my career. So for those who have followed my story, I used to run the undergrad campus recruiting program for one of the big four consulting firms in their tech consulting area, and I led it nationally. So I've had the experience of recruiting as well as being a hiring manager, someone who actually works and makes the decisions on how many people to hire, but also on the recruiting side where I will actually screen, will take a look at resumes and do interviews and all that sort of stuff, attend networking events, lots of networking events, in order to make sure that folks can get in and the right people get in. So when we talk about HR, a lot of it is very people focused, right? And in my day job as a consultant, I would be a practice lead, so I'd be very interested in the development of my people as well, right? So I generally put HR in one of two buckets. It's people focused, but it's getting the right people in, and then it's also maintaining and making sure that the people that are in there are doing well, right? So when we talk about that maintenance function, it could be kind of the day-to-day functions and then the more strategic ones. So the day-to-day ones are more kind of like payroll, making sure people get paid, like benefits and compensation. Are you aligned with the market, that sort of thing. And then there's a lot of learning and development stuff as well that happens. So are you growing? Are you getting better? Performance evaluations and things like that. And are you continuing to do the right things? Then there are certain things like policies, and then depending on whether you work with like different labor markets and stuff like that, unions and things like that, there's all sorts of different intricacies. And then oftentimes there's the technology that supports all these functions. So the HRIS, the Human Resources Information Systems, that automate a lot of these functions, right? So hopefully someone's not going into the bank and paying individually each employee. You have a payroll system that does all that. The learning management system, oftentimes it's self-directed, where an employee can go in and look and then register for an online course or see what sort of live workshops are there, either virtual or in person. Some of them can apply for different grants and subsidies for taking examinations or longer courses as well. That might need approval and things like that as well. And then the performance reviews and things like that. So there's a lot of different functions that go into HR, right? Anything related to a person, an employee of the company, and to make them better. So HR is a very broad function, and I find that it's actually growing in terms of its need, right? Because people are realizing, or companies are realizing, that it's really the people that make it up, right? So the business is the business, and the technology and all that sort of stuff is there, and it's often the quality of the people that determine whether or not that business runs better, more smoothly, more sustainably for a longer time than whatever setup, right? So you hope that you can have like a plug and play model where you can just put anybody in there, and then they can churn things out, like let's say a fast food place where you get a pretty much the same kind of quality food just because the system is designed that way. But oftentimes that's not where the really innovative companies and the ones that really make a difference in the world, that's not the type of people that are there, right? You want people who have creativity, imagination, provide great customer service at the end of the day. And by doing all those things, then these companies thrive. So I think now and even in the future, it'll be HR's time to shine, right? To get away from more the traditional administrative functions where it's all just payroll and like, well, how do I take advantage of my benefits and vacation and stuff like that? And more into, okay, how do I really allow my people to thrive, right? How do I get the best out of them? How do I put them in the best position to succeed, provide them the right tools, all the whole work from home thing that COVID has required us to do, right? What about going back into the office? Is that required? Is that not? How do we balance it? And if people are just coming into the office whenever they want to, right? How does that build a culture and all that sort of stuff? So there's a lot of great nuances, and I think that's one of the great developments that are coming up, where people who are interested in other people have a great time in terms of how to develop them from a business and a corporate context. So HR is very varied in terms of what you can do, but it can be one of the more challenging areas to get into. And the main reason is because HR has a relatively small footprint in an organization. So generally speaking, in a company, you might only have one HR professional for every, let's say, 100 employees, 50 employees, right? And it's only really when a company gets to above kind of 30, 40, 50 that they actually have a full-time dedicated HR professional. For smaller companies that are only kind of 10, 20 people, you don't have enough work for someone that's a dedicated HR, right? They'll probably be rolled into an operations role, whereas an operations office manager or something like that, you have to make sure that people are paid, that they're onboarded, they're trained, they have the right access to the right stuff. But other than that, when you're a small company, you don't really have that time or the capacity to think more strategically and all that. And when you get to kind of 50, 100 people, well, then you probably need a full-time HR person. But all those functions are rolled into one person, right? It's a lot for one person to do. So when you're thinking of HR, there's really kind of that 1 to 100 for employees of a company. Obviously, except for ones that focus explicitly on HR and people functions. But generally speaking, in any bank, any telecom, any manufacturer, whatever, you're looking at roughly those ratios. So there's not a lot of them to go around, right? So if you're actually looking for those roles, they're a little bit more scarce than some of the other ones, right? Because it's more of a support function, even though it's a very important support function. It's kind of often put into the back burner, right? So some of the easiest ways that I've seen to get in is usually either through the recruiting route or through kind of an HR generalist type role, right? So recruiting, that they're bringing people in, right? And they're making sure that the right people get hired. And some of the more creative ways that I've heard of people trying to get into the HR sphere is basically to help recruiters, help HR talent professionals, help them to recruit even before they join the company, right? So they will be on a company's page, a small or a medium, a large company, and take a look at the job postings. But instead of finding a job for themselves, because like I said, the HR postings are often a little bit lighter, then they'll actually try to find and refer their friends, their colleagues, their coworkers, and say, hey, I know someone who would be a great fit for that role. And then that person starts taking notice, right? The HR professional that's on the other side is saying, wow, this person keeps sending me some great candidates, and maybe I should hire them, right? And if you do that for a long enough time, you first of all hone your skills, right? To see, okay, well, that person I sent you, were they good? Oh, what other questions, what other things should I ask and them in order to make sure that they are fit for the culture? Okay, yeah, I can do that. And when you do that, you get better at your craft, and then you can actually get in. Now, it is one of those functions where if you get in through an agency, so sometimes there are HR agencies, talent acquisition agencies that sit outside of a company, and their job is to basically fill those roles, right? So oftentimes you can get a role in one of those companies and then transition into an actual industry HR type role as well. So that's another way that you can get in. That one is a little bit more high burn, it's high performance. There's usually like a lot of metrics and targets that you have to do, and a lot of it is cold calling. So if you're not really comfortable in a role in sales, it's basically a sales type role where you're connecting with people, and then you're selling people, right? And their capabilities and all of that sort of stuff. So if you think about applying your craft from a recruiting perspective, that's often the best way to get in because it's the most outwardly accessible. Like people aren't generally, or companies aren't generally going to share their data or their payroll, benefits plans and stuff like that and allow you to play with that. But they're more than welcome to take people that's coming in, right? Oftentimes the next one is kind of in that HR general and assistant role, right? So in those smaller companies, medium-sized companies, or hopefully a larger company, right? Those ones might even have like HR coordinators and assistants and stuff like that, where you're focusing on any one of those areas and you support that function, right? Oftentimes at that role it becomes an administrative function, right? Because you're making sure that all the learning plans are updated, that all of the payroll setup is set up, and onboarding is going smoothly and all that sort of stuff. But the goal is to get exposed to that so that you can move on to higher functions where you become like an HR generalist where you still do all the functions, and then maybe an HR business partner. And the main difference between a generalist and a business partner is that the generalist tends to run the day-to-day type of HR operations, and the business partner tends to think a little bit more strategically. So let's plan and forecast who you need in the next 2, 5, 10 years, that sort of thing, so we can help with the learning and development and maybe start stewarding people forward. So it's not just reacting to what's out there, it's also being proactive in the whole management of people. So that's a couple of areas where or types of roles where you want to consider in order to get into the HR function. And to get in it, it's pretty much the same as any other, but because the roles are a little bit more scarce, you're probably going to benefit a little bit more on the networking side. So if you're in clubs, there are more and more HR clubs that I find. Generally speaking, that's one of the later ones to come in, because most people are interested when they're in business in things like accounting and finance and all that. But now I do see a lot of HR organizations, HR student clubs that are being created, and they'll have events. Some of them even have kind of conferences, case competitions and things like that. And they obviously do it from an HR context. So making sure to attend and meeting all the different HR professionals there. For Ontario, they have the HRPA, the HR Professionals Association, and they have certifications as well. So even as a student or a recent grad, even though you might not qualify for all the requirements, you could volunteer there, and that would be a great way to get access to a lot of HR professionals. So building networks, building meaningful connections, and seeing how you can help, maybe doing what I said on the recruiting side, or maybe helping them, provide them some resources, because oftentimes, especially in smaller organizations, HR people are often overwhelmed because they have to do everything, right? All that sort of stuff. And oftentimes things that they want to do gets put on the back burner because they have to deal with this day to day, or someone comes to them with some benefits issue, or someone's harassing another person or what have you. And those things mire up their time instead of them being able to think strategically, right? So if you can either provide them something to do that day to day quicker, or help them to think strategically, then that demonstrates your value. So continuing to apply online. And I actually find it quite curious where a lot of the HR professionals I know, they don't have very great resumes, right? And oftentimes, even if you're a recruiter, they often don't have great resumes. And I think it's because they are so used to it, they do it all day to day, that they're really critical of their own resume. They almost don't want to put it out there because they always can feel or find a way to get it better, right? So I'd encourage you to reach out to someone to help review it, because especially if you're a recruiter or if you had experience doing that, your resume is probably better than you think, right? It's just you're so critical because you do it day to day that you probably put unrealistic expectations on it, right? So continue to apply online, but again, there'll be fewer of them out there. So focus on that networking. Focus on the company that you want to work for, right? The organizations like the HRPA, or meetups that are around as well. And with anything, if you want to also become a thought leader, where you're on LinkedIn and contributing to the different hashtags that are out there, putting your comments and perspectives and connecting with the people who provide that content. When you do that and put yourself out there, then you're more likely to be found as well, right? So you're more likely to be picked out in a pile of resumes. You're more likely to be taken up for that coffee chat, virtual chat, Zoom chat, whatever it is. And from there, a whole bunch of opportunities will come in. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight for those that come to me looking to get into HR and learning a little bit more about that function. And I'm learning to a little bit more and more and more, and I hope that it's going to have a lot of ways where it can improve, because one of the things that is a bit of a pet peeve of mine is the whole hiring process to begin with, right? So I'm not a fan of the whole resume process and interviews and stuff like that, because it's really just a random piece of paper where it's up to the person and how good they are in presenting themselves. It's not that much of a good representation of that person, but most people haven't thought of anything better. I myself haven't necessarily thought of anything better too, right? So it's the best that we have right now, and we're going to have to deal with it. That's why I really push on the networking side, because you really get to demonstrate your value to someone else, and by doing that, you get to showcase your skills and your talents and your potential, and also you get to experience their culture and their capabilities, their potentials as well, to see if it's a fit for you. Right? So hopefully that gives you a good overview of HR, and yeah, we'll see you again in a future episode.
Thanks for joining us on the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Luki Danu, LUKIDANU, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.